Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to Intro to College Chem. Today we're going to be covering rules for significant digits. If you'd like to see how to add and subtract / multiply and divide them, be sure to check out the two videos in the description. Anyway, let's get right into it. So, first rule is going to be non-zero digits are always significant. 2 is going to be any zeros between two significant digits are always significant. A final zero or trailing zeros in the decimal portion only are significant. And bonus rule, or probably the most important rule, all zeros to the left of non-zero digits are not significant, no matter if there's a decimal place there. So let's actually go and see what this actually looks like, and let's give some examples for the first rule. So first rule, non-zero digits are always significant. So as you can see here we have a 13, and there's, of course, these are not zeros, so in that case the rule already says that both of these are considered significant. So in this case, 13 is going to have two significant digits. Let me change colors here. There we go. So this is going to have two significant digits always, and that doesn't change. All right, and here, as we can see, there's also three numbers that are not zeros, so that right away tells you that it's three significant digits, and this rule applies all the way through to no matter how big or small the number is. As long as you see that there's just actual non-zero numbers, they're always going to be significant, and you can just kind of do a little ladder like this. Anyway, let's do rule number 2. So any zeros between two significant digits are significant. So the only time where you're going to have to think about whether they are or not significant is when you see a zero. In rule 1 you don't, so of course you can just count them and you're fine. In rule 2 though, the rule is that if it's in between two numbers that are not zero, it's going to count, because that zero is what makes it that big of a number. So in this case, 101, or lol, we can do three significant digits because the zero is in between two non-zero numbers, so it's going to count. So it's going to be 3. Same thing here. Really doesn't matter what the number is. If you see that the zero is in between two non-zeros, it's always going to count. So there's 3. Here, different number. The 0, as you see, is also surrounded by non-zeros, so that's going to be 4 because we have 1, 2, 3, and then the 0 which counts this time, so that'd be 4. Same thing here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 0 here counts again because it's between two non-zeros. And like I said, that rule never changes, just like rule 1. So if you know those rules, or at least kind of remember them on the exam, it's going to be pretty easier, or much easier to just be able to look at it right away and know how many sig figs there are. So rule number 3, this is where it gets, where people would get most confused. Certainly confused me when I first learned it, and it's that if you don't have a decimal place to the right or left of 0, it will not count. So for example, here we have 350. We know that it's 350, but in terms of significant figures, we don't know if there might be another 0 here, another 0 here, or a 0 here to the right or left, because we don't know where the decimal place is. So in that case, it was just decided that this would count as only two significant figures, because the 0 does not count because, well, it doesn't apply to rule 2. It's not surrounded by non-significant figures, and there's no decimal place around it. So you would only count the non-zeros. So as you can see here, we're only counting these two because the 0 is, well, we don't know if it's attached to anything. And the opposite example of this, which you should always know, if you see a decimal place and you see a 0 to the left of it like this, in addition to these numbers here, that 0 is going to count. Okay, that 0 is going to count because you know that the decimal place is there. And this is always true no matter how big or small the number is. That's why I kind of also provided a very big number here. So because there's a decimal place here, it's always going to count, right? So we have the two non-zeros, which will always count based on rule 1. And then we have here, based on rule 3, that the fact that these 3 will count as well because the decimal place there, showing that they're significant. All right, so this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 significant figures. So these rules are always going to be the same, and they never change. So if you can kind of, be able to identify them, and you don't even have to know them word by word, but by just being able to identify them through the number, you'd have an easier time with it. So now let's go back to the last rule, which is probably the most important rule, and again, where people can get confused. So all zeros to the left of non-zero digits are not significant. So as you can see here, we have two significant figures here that we know are significant because they're not zeros. We have 1 and 3. However, we have 2 zeros and a decimal place here. Well, before you'd be like, okay, well this 0, since it's to the left of a decimal place, it would count, right? Or these 2 might count as well because there's a decimal place there. But that's not the case. If it's to the left of your 2 significant figures, or how many you have, all these won't count. And that rule stays the same. So if it's to the left of your non-significant digits, it will not count. So in this case, we can say that this has only 2 significant digits because anything to the left of it doesn't really count. Same thing here. Even though there's a decimal place there, this is only going to be 3, the 3 non-zeros. And same thing here. It doesn't matter how many zeros you have here. You're only going to have 2 significant figures. And this kind of ties into scientific notation and why that's so important and efficient. And there will be a video on that too, linked in the description. So now let's kind of combine this bonus rule with the second rule, which, as you remember, if it's surrounded by 2 non-zeros, the 0 is going to count. And the one I'm referring to is this one right here. This will count as significant because it's surrounded by 2 3s here. However, anything to the left of all these numbers is not going to count because, again, it's to the left. So in this case, we have yet again 3 significant figures. So now let's kind of just recap so we don't get confused between rule 3 and the bonus rule. So going back to where we were, as you can see, if it's to the right, the zeros are to the right of what's significant here, those zeros are going to count if it has a decimal place. If it doesn't have a decimal place, that 0 won't count. It'll only be the actual numbers that are not 0. Now, if the zeros are to the left of your significant digits, like here, these will not count. So if it's to the left of your numbers, it will not count. If it's to the right with a decimal, it will count. So just remember that next time you see or are asked to find significant figures, and you're going to do pretty all right.